I'd just like to say good evening, and it's a pleasure to see so many of you here tonight attending our symposium. My name is Michael Greenlee, and I and Olivia Hodges are the co-chairs of the Borah Foundation Committee. Tonight, I have the honor of welcoming all of you to the 2009 Borah Symposium, Building Health, Building Peace. As you know, the Borah Symposium is the result of many months planning and the dedicated work of the members of the Borah Committee and the Martin Institute for Peace Studies and Conflict Resolution. In your programs, you'll find the names of those faculty, staff, and students responsible for bringing you this year's symposium. If you will, please join me in expressing our gratitude for the work this committee has performed. This year's symposium has brought together a remarkable group of people whose combined experience covers 4 decades of providing humanitarian health care, sometimes under the most horrendous situations imaginable. Our guests include Dr. Jose Romero-Terrell, Dr. Neil Arya, Marie Nui, and Mr. John Hassel. And in a few moments, University President Dr. Stephen Daley Larson will introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland. So once again, let us show our guests our great appreciation for being here with us tonight. As Dr. Arya noted last evening, health and peace are holistic concepts, sharing common foundations and providing both negative and positive contributions. Health includes the absence of disease, and peace includes the absence of war. But these are only their negative contributions due to the absence of disease and war. Health and peace also require positive action. Health encompasses the complete physical, mental, and social well-being of individuals and communities, a definition which goes far beyond the absence of disease. Peace includes the development of cultures which promote education, tolerance, justice, sustainable development, and democracy. Once again, a definition which is much broader than the mere absence of war. So we can see that as we lay the foundation for one, we are also creating the other. As we create cultures of peace, we will at the same time promote the well-being of individuals and communities. And as we improve the well-being of individuals and communities, we will increase the potential for growing cultures of peace. We are building health and building peace. And now I would like to introduce the President of the University of Idaho, Dr. Stephen Daley Larson. Dr. Daley Larson has worked throughout the United States and in 11 other countries. Prior to taking on the role of the President, Dr. Daley Larson served as Dean of the UI College of Natural Resources and as a professor in the Department of Forest Resources. He has received the National Honor Award from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, was an inaugural fellow in the Kellogg Foundation National Leadership Program, and is currently the National Public Policy Chair for the National Association of University Forest Resources Programs. And in addition to these accomplishments, Dr. Daley Larson is also a 2-time graduate of the University of Idaho. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Daley Larson to the podium.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. As president of the University of Idaho, it's a great honor and a distinct pleasure to be here welcoming you this evening and to introduce our distinguished guest, Dr. Harlem, Brundtland. The Borah Symposium, as you know, is an annual signature event at the University of Idaho, an event that allows us, you and I, to teach, learn, and exchange dialogue on peace, human rights, conflict resolution, topics central to our university's mission and to the common interest of humanity. As many of you are well aware, this august annual university event began long ago, and in 1938, the Borah Foundation sponsored an address by Eleanor Roosevelt, a well-known advocate for peace and human rights in our country and around the world. I'm proud and moved each time I see that Douglas fir tree that Miss Roosevelt and Teddy Roosevelt planted to commemorate her visit to our great campus on that year. It stands across from the main entrance to the administration building, for me, in clear view of my office. I encourage all of you to go and find that space and the other memorial trees on our campus. Earlier today, I had the great honor of standing with shovel in hand, the very same shovel that Teddy Roosevelt held at that planting on the University of Idaho campus. Standing there with Dr. Brundtland, fittingly putting in the ground, or at least in a bucket that will go in the ground on someday in spring, a Norway maple. How fitting. Perpetual recognition of this Borah keynote speaker in 2009, our featured speaker this evening, Dr. Harlem, Brundtland. I have encouraged her to please come back at a time in the not-too-distant future when that tree is approaching full splendor. Let's give her some encouragement right now to come back to the University of Idaho in the future. So we plant these great trees to commemorate great people when they come here to visit, to create a living and enduring reminder of these events that have taken place at our University of Idaho, in our community, for the people of our university, our town, and our great state, for future generations, which is so fitting for the presentation by our speaker this evening. In planting a tree, we keep history alive to help inform and direct and inspire our very future. So I am particularly proud, and it is so fitting, that the University of Idaho is engaged in discussions about sustainable development and public health, hand in glove. The panelists and the speakers who participate in the Borah Symposium bring a diversity of experiences that create both interesting and informative dialogues. It is appropriate, yea, imperative to me, that these types of discussions take place in our university. And we are proud to sponsor and provide such forums for the citizens of our community, state, nation, and now undoubtedly our world. The Borah Symposium is truly a collaborative event. Each year's symposium is planned by a faculty-student committee, which determines the year's topic and makes arrangements working throughout the year to land our key speakers. Students and faculty work together to ensure the continuing success year after year of a truly great signature event. On behalf of everyone in our university, I extend my thanks to all of those who helped to make this year's symposium a great success. How about join me in a warm thank you to the folks who organized this year's Borah Symposium. Special thank you, of course, goes to Dr. Michael Greenlee and to Olivia Hodges, co-chairs for the event. Dr. Greenlee, who introduced me this evening, is a faculty member in the law library, and Olivia, who hosted the tree planting skillfully earlier today, is a senior in journalism and mass media. Also, a very, very special thanks to Bill Smith, director of the Martin Institute and the Martin School of International Studies. This is the official keeper of the Great Borah Symposium. Michael, Olivia, and Bill, along with several colleagues and committee members, have put together a stellar program this year featuring a variety of presentations and activities, all devoted to understanding the causes of war and the conditions for establishing what we all want, a lasting peace. This year's symposium, which began on Sunday, has featured important and enlightening discussions with many notable speakers, many of whom are here with us this evening. I want to thank all of our speakers for traveling, being with us, and for saying such things to me as, gee, the Palouse is a really friendly place. The good news is that it isn't over yet. There are many more events tomorrow throughout the day, and I encourage you to attend. But now we are ready to launch our great keynote event. It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, an energetic blend of stateswoman, physician, manager, politician, international activist. Dr. Brundtland has always led the world on issues of global significance. For over 4 decades, she's been dedicated to global interdependence, the focusing and promoting of sustainable development, increasing environmental awareness, and advocating for good health as a basic right of all human beings. Dr. Brundtland spent 10 years as a physician and scientist, 20 years in public office, including serving as Prime Minister of Norway 3 times, the first woman and the youngest person ever to do so. She then became the first female Director General of the World Health Organization. In this capacity, Dr. Brundtland adopted a far-reaching approach to public health, establishing a commission on macroeconomics and health chaired by Jeffrey Sachs, addressing violence as a major health issue. In her acceptance speech, she said, "What is our key mission? I see the World Health Organization's role as being the moral voice and the technical leader in improving the health of all people in the world, ready and able to give advice on key issues that can unleash the development and alleviate the suffering. I see our purpose to be combating disease and ill health, promoting sustainable and equitable health systems in all countries." Close quote. Dr. Brundtland received her Doctor of Medicine degree from the University of Oslo and received a Master of Public Health degree from Harvard. She's been called by the Financial Times one of the 4 most influential Europeans of the last 25 years, in stellar company with Pope John Paul II, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Margaret Thatcher. She also was recognized in 2003 by Scientific American as their policy leader of the year for coordinating a rapid worldwide response to stem outbreaks of SARS. As a member of the Elders, a group founded by Nelson Mandela, Graça Machel, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Dr. Brundtland contributes her wisdom, her independent leadership and integrity to tackling our world's greatest, toughest problems, aiming to make our world a better place for us to reside and to prosper. What an incredible, almost indescribable honor it is for us to have Dr. Brundtland with us here in Moscow this evening to present tonight's keynote address titled, "In the Service of Health and Peace." Will you join me in providing a warm Palouse, Moscow, and University of Idaho welcome to a true friend of humanity, Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. President Lawson, co-chairs, Professor Smith, students, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure and indeed an honor for me and my husband to have traveled here to this great university and to Moscow, not the original one, which is much closer, both to Nice, where we live presently, Nice in France, and of course Oslo, where we both come from the country of Norway, neighboring Russia, having the original Moscow. I was thinking about that as we traveled. You know, a 9-hour jet lag you get from Europe, but it's wonderful to have seen also this part of the United States. I appreciate the focus that had been chosen by the committee in the title of my keynote address, which in fact was a little different from what President Lawson just now referred to. I don't care really about the different, umbrellas. It was really a precise focus on health, its role, health and illness, its role in preventing or causing conflict and contributing to peace. So that was my thinking as I chose the focus of the keynote address. And in fact, that title is one that in many ways captures most of the ideas and values that have shaped my life and work as I look over those 40 years you talked about. As a child, I was convinced that we all should be given equal respect, rights, and opportunities in life. That was my basic value thinking, that we need to build and secure a society that is just and fair and gives equal rights to women and men. This is about the inherent rights of every individual and about human dignity. I was also convinced as a small child that we all have a duty to try to make a difference, to contribute to that kind of goal, building a society based on those kinds of values. And of course, they could not be limited. Those kinds of thoughts could not be limited to a goal affecting only your own community, your own country. It had to be something that crosses all borders and all of humanity, all our fellow human beings, which are in different parts of this world. We all have a responsibility to try to make a difference. Now, I chose to become a doctor, to be able to have a positive impact for change. Health is, of course, centrally placed, given its great significance for us all. It is a human right, and so is education. We all have a right to live and learn, to be able to become active participants in our own society as we grow up. This means a key focus on children and on women, to safeguard the very basis for a healthy population. I am happy that these fundamental concerns are now a key part of public action and debate here in the United States, based on the election campaign and the conclusions by American voters last November. We see now, as your president has traveled today to London, meeting with the G20 and meeting Europe in the following days, that this belief across the world that there has been some kind of awakening in the United States, that this is hopeful for all of us. I say this fully aware of the difficult economic crisis facing the US and the whole world. There is no solution, no way out of the crisis without being fully conscious that the human potential, the very basis for future progress and productivity, is placed at the center of our attention. Life and health are our most precious assets. I moved from public health to the environment as a young doctor, only 35 years old, when the Prime Minister to my surprise and completely without any pre-knowledge, asked me to enter his government one early September day 35 years ago. My background and thinking had already linked environment, nature, flora, and fauna to people, our own impact, and their consequences for the future on that fine and sensitive relationship. However, although this had happened already as I studied at Harvard and continued my public health work at home, I was still somewhat surprised that I was asked to become Minister of Environment and not Minister of Health. But I never regretted that the Prime Minister said what he said. I mean, it was to my benefit, to broaden my whole basis. Because he said, I don't want a professional to be the leading politician of a sector. So he moved the man who was then leading the Environment Ministry to Health. He didn't like it. He didn't feel he knew anything about health. He had a labor union background and had been, more of a political figure. But he was forced to enter something new. And I was inspired and forced to see the environment area as something that I could tackle with my health background. And I quickly realized that that was the case, because as I said, people, of course, are at the center of our concern for our own environment. So, health and environment are intrinsically linked. And to safeguard the planet and take necessary action in time, today, we need to spread the knowledge and the insight to have necessary action happen in time. We need to spread the knowledge and create the background for responsible commitment across all nations, because we know we are facing a climate crisis at the same time that we are in the middle of an economic crisis. Health and environment, as I said, are intrinsically linked, and people are at the center once more. So there is no way to confront the climate crisis without a global perspective. And tragically, both the economic crisis and the climate crisis is affecting today poor people in poor countries the most. So they have a double hit in this situation. Let me then turn to some historic observations, illustrating different aspects of the links between health, illness, and security. Historically, disease in other places was seen as an impediment to exploration, a challenge to winning a war. Cholera and other diseases killed at least 3 times more soldiers in the Crimean War than the actual conflict did. Malaria, measles, mumps, smallpox, and typhoid felled more combatants than did bullets in the American Civil War. And the Panama Canal went over schedule because of tropical diseases, then unknown, untreatable, and often fatal. Today, on that front, there are very few unknowns. Globalization has connected Bujumbura to Bombay, Bangkok to Boston. In an interconnected and interdependent world, bacteria and viruses travel almost as fast as email messages and money flows. There are no health sanctuaries, no impregnable walls between the world that is healthy, well-fed, and well-off, and another world which is sick, malnourished, and impoverished. Globalization has shrunk distances, broken down old barriers, and linked people together. It has also made problems halfway around the globe everyone's problem. And we know that like a stone thrown on the waters, a difficult social or economic situation in one community can ripple and resonate around the world. But now there are solutions to those diseases which plagued the explorers, the soldiers, and the colonialists of historical times. We know how to prevent and treat malaria. There are vaccines for yellow fever, treatments for tuberculosis. The striking feature is, while we diligently take anti-malarials and top up our vaccinations when we travel to developing countries, the people living there, those threatened mostly by those diseases, don't have that access. 3,000 children in Africa die each day from malaria. They die of vaccine-preventable diseases, still today, like measles, by the hundreds of thousands. And people are dying by the millions every year of HIV/AIDS. Why is this so? We now need to accept that health is an underlying determinant of development, global security, and stability. For this, we can consider the sharp, short impact of conflict, and perhaps more importantly, the silent and eerie march of diseases which devastate populations over time. These are the stones with the largest ripples, and the ones that go unnoticed until it is too late. 35 years ago, HIV was a specter, all but invisible on the horizon. It was considered a disease which affected specific minorities, gay men, and intravenous drug users. Science was slow to respond. The rare cancer Kaposi sarcoma was a marker and a sentence to die a painful, slow, and often lonely death. The world took more notice with the realization that the human immunodeficiency virus knew no borders. Given the right vector, it could infect everyone, anyone. Man, woman, gay, straight, healthy, and hemophiliac. And they did. By 1990, in wealthy countries, we were screening blood donors, teaching our kids how to protect themselves against HIV. Condom use had increased, incidence declined. And then antiretrovirals were made available to those who could afford them. People in countries with health insurance gained access, giving tremendous hope for a longer, healthier life. In short, HIV diminished for those in rich countries as an urgent public health problem. Today, more than 30 million are HIV positive, the largest number living in sub-Saharan Africa. They are trying to survive in some of the poorest countries, here we are, and conditions, with no access to the most basic health care, much less sophisticated and expensive treatment. Many have died, many are dying. They are mothers and fathers, teachers and nurses, other health professionals, civil servants, miners, soldiers. They are leaving a huge social and professional gap, an imminent threat to countries struggling to develop. They are leaving orphans, penniless grandmothers, caring for their children's children, family members and communities, frightened, hurt, stigmatized, health systems that are stretched well beyond their often frail capacities in the first place. We will see the effects of this unfolding tragedy for decades to come. Take Southern Africa, a number of political, economic, and social factors have played a role in creating a situation where millions and millions are in that region have been affected by famine. Southern Africa, totally, I'm not speaking South Africa only, but Southern Africa. No sudden event has caused such a crisis. Rather, it comes as a result of a long process of underinvestment in human resources. This process has been compounded by the AIDS pandemic, which, for example, has reversed much of the tremendous progress Botswana had achieved and is now becoming a profound burden in South Africa as well as Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, etc. So we see, and then climate changes add to the potential of devastating deterioration in many parts on that continent. We see a downward spiral, making countries increasingly weak. The important challenge is to address the underlying causes and arrest the descent before we are forced to deal with the ultimate consequences: famine, unrest, and even more human suffering. Consequences which will touch everyone, because the loss of so much human potential will indeed resonate around the world. I mentioned that the short, sharp impact of conflict, such as war, more quickly brings to light the inevitable links between health and development, between health and security. The obvious, the war-wounded, soldiers and civilians. The medium-term impact, people uprooted, displaced to camps with little sanitation or health services, schools disrupted, and food insecurity. In the Congo, where more than 3 million people have died through years of violent conflict, many people are traumatized, their mental health precarious, not to mention the scores of diseases which continue to attack, kill, and debilitate hundreds of thousands of people. This too will resonate. These conflicts spill into other countries. People leave their own countries out of fear or necessity. Professionals will be lost. Health and education systems will be overstretched, crack and break. They will take years to repair. And there are many such examples in our unstable world. Just think of Sudan, that I haven't even mentioned. My last year in WHO, however, saw the shortest, sharpest shock of all, an infectious outbreak which captured imaginations, often more column inches than the war in Iraq. People are surprised when I say it, but it is a fact. It happened in those same months, March, April 2003. More headlines than AIDS, TB, or malaria. SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, put the world on high alert and drove unprecedented collaboration to stop a disease which had an immediate and negative impact, not only on the potential health threats that it carried, but on markets, on tourism, on trade, and on hospitals, even in the most developed countries, such as the neighboring country of Canada, with the most advanced health systems. In Toronto, it was really problematic. One person infected staying in an international hotel put the world at risk. And unlike other diseases that we can prevent or treat, SARS was undiagnosable, untreatable, and for 1 of every 6 patients, fatal. The way the world responded to SARS and the way our international institution, WHO, was able to step up to the plate and deal with it is global public health at its best. Scientists put aside their differences, drives to be the first, and came together instead to share sequencing and to study results. In 1 month, we had identified the virus. Doctors from around the world in virtual conferences to share advice on how best to treat patients. Public health authorities from opposite sides of the globe flew to Geneva to share their experiences with SARS, their successes and failures with 192 member states. But as a result of the way that every public health system around the world that had the challenge, that had a patient, the way they collaborated and the way they were able to contain each outbreak led to, in just 4 short months, a situation where we had identified a completely new disease, unknown, and contained a global outbreak which could have become a global catastrophe. The short, sharp shock made us all stand up and be willing to pay attention. Due to the speed of science and using the best evidence, we quickly knew that SARS could infect men and women, people who were gay or straight, sick or healthy, and governments were committed. Resources made available, people made aware, health workers given tools for action. Information was shared across borders. In short, there was global mobilization to fight a global threat. The result? We probably won't find ourselves 10, 15 years down the road with SARS also endemic in the countries which can least afford it, devastating lives and economies. Because we acted together to make sure that wouldn't happen. And we found it was in everyone's interest to act. In today's connected societies, there was no choice. It was impossible to hide SARS in a world with the internet and email. Impossible to pretend it didn't exist or that it was already contained, because this is what partly happened in the early weeks of this situation. We knew, because of the email messages and the internet that came to WHO and picked up what countries were not telling us. The consequences of these early trials to conceal led to mistrust in government, mistrust in economies, and societies were indeed shaken to their foundation, and fundamental questions raised about the handling of disease, of the media, and information, as is what happened in China. But to better understand this wider picture, we must go back to what I call the slow creep of disease. Who is affected and why? These diseases that we can protect ourselves against: malaria, TB, HIV, measles, diarrheal diseases, respiratory infections, are impacting people in the poorest countries, where economies don't grow, where social unrest, unemployment, and the threat of civil conflict force the stagnation of health and education systems. And climate change further exacerbates this situation. And I'm not talking about small numbers here. Between 1990 and 2000, the Human Development Index declined in nearly 30 countries. Well over 1 billion people, more than 1/5 of the world's population, are unable to meet their daily minimum needs. And 1/3 of all children are undernourished. In many countries which have seen economic growth, increasing inequality means that the poorest part of the population has seen little or none of the benefits of that growth. The average African household consumes 20% less today than it did 25 years ago. So a world where, and I think We need to remind ourselves of this here in the United States. A world where 1 billion people are deprived, insecure, and vulnerable is an unsafe world. The separation between domestic and international health problems is losing its usefulness as people and goods travel across continents. More than 2 million people cross international borders every single day, about a tenth of humanity each year. And of these, more than 1 million people travel from developing to industrialized countries each week. We also know that in poor countries, where people feel powerless and watch as much of the world gets richer, they can bundle hatred and channel it in the most devastating ways. A giant construction site where the World Trade Center used to be, I think will always also remind us of a world of conflict, a world divided. It exposes a new awareness of our common vulnerability. We must counter this manipulation of despair, because we know what happens is that people build on this kind of despair and bundle the hatred and direct it. So we should seek to engage even more strongly with countries in crisis to promote the values of democracy and justice, so crucial for preventing conflict and promoting peace, which is the issue of tonight. There are many more compelling reasons for engaging in and supporting the rebuilding of weak and failed states. Diseases are spreading mainly as a result of reduced efforts to control them and health systems weakened by poverty, as we have talked about. We cannot afford to have large neglected areas where population is left to fend for itself against diseases. This is the situation in many places in this world. Take Ebola, for example. With a 90% fatality rate when left untreated. So far, it has been contained because it has been confined to small villages far from big cities. Health systems like that of Uganda have done a fine job in isolating patients and restricting spread in one of those outbreaks that happened a few years ago. They could do this with the help of international specialists from WHO and CDC Atlanta, because the security situation in the country was good in Uganda. So I think we need to conclude that countries trying to grapple with new epidemics or collapsing under the weight of disease and malnutrition can have a devastating impact also on economies and societies around the globe. The way that we as an international community work to address current crises and prevent future ones will determine whether we succeed or fail in our shared efforts to advance global development, growth, and peace. Now, in fact, there is nothing new in the idea itself that health issues transcend borders. One has only to think about the scourges of history that I mentioned: plague, smallpox, influenza, and the devastation they have wrought over the centuries, to realize that disease rarely respects national frontiers. What is new today is our total degree of interdependence. Trade flows of raw materials, goods and services have increased 15-fold since 1945. Investment flows have multiplied more dramatically still, fundamentally changing the way that economies and societies interact. And of course, increasing the possibility and the risk of the kind of financial and economic crisis that we are facing today, which is crisscrossing the world. But this is why we need action by the G20. This is why we need more insight, more regulation, more common efforts to be sure that we don't let our system falter in this way in the future. The line, and I'm going back to health from economy, the line separating domestic and international health problems is fast losing its meaning. As people and goods travel, as I mentioned, more rapidly, in far greater numbers, there is no such thing as foreign diseases anymore. Suddenly, dengue fever, West Nile virus, now SARS, was everyone's problem. Shortcomings or delays in international cooperation can have immediate and devastating effects. One country's failure to adequately address a health crisis can now compromise the security of the global community as a whole. So a main lesson over the last 10 years is that only peace reveals, because then I come to the building of reconstruction after conflict. If you don't rebuild the health needs of a country, re-establishing health after conflict, then that country cannot stabilize. It's crucial to invest in health to consolidate peace after it has been achieved in one of these countries in crisis. So investing in global health is investing in national security, investing in weak states as well, or, as my fellow countryman and the world's first High Commissioner for Refugees, Fridtjof Nansen, put it in the language of his time. He said, "Charity is realpolitik." He was trying to capture what we today, I think, understand are the links in this situation. A strong state is needed to sustain public health, to prevent disease outbreaks, win battles for eradication, create conditions that reduce disease transmission, and promote health for all. In public health, we often say that one person infected makes the whole world really at risk. And this is literally true for polio. Think about it, which we are hopefully on the verge of eradicating globally. Only when every child in every country is vaccinated, and there are no more cases of polio anywhere in the world for 3 years, can we draw a sign of relief that the virus is gone, just like we managed to get rid of the smallpox virus. It's not there except in a few laboratories, which is on many people's minds. What if something happens? But it's not out in the human community anymore. And this is what happened with SARS. We got rid of the virus. It doesn't live anywhere anymore because the last patient had the virus, got past the disease, and after that, the virus had nowhere to spread as long as you contained each outbreak. It is interesting that it's not only infectious diseases that spread with globalization. Changes in lifestyle and diet prompt an increase in heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, not only in the US and in Europe and in the rich world more broadly, but it spreads by market forces, by inspiring people in poor countries to do the same stupid things that we have been doing. It's dangerous. And more than anything, tobacco is sweeping the globe as it is crisscrossed by market forces, which is why we fought in my time in WHO to have the Convention on Tobacco Control. And I am so glad and so relieved that within my 5 years in WHO, we were able to conclude that convention and to have the Bush administration willing to sign it. It was unbelievable, and it has had a great impact. It is the second big public health story, in addition to SARS, from the 5 years of my time in WHO. So poor societies don't have to take after our learning experience of the impact of tobacco on our public health. So, but what is emerging today is a new and wider notion of national security, something we can, looking for words, call human security. The levels of ill health in countries constituting the majority of the world's population pose a direct threat to their own national economic and political viability, and therefore to the global economic and political interest of all countries. Territorial dispute is no longer the prime source of conflict. It is increasingly rooted in battle over resources, mismanagement, aftermath of humanitarian crisis, shortage of food and water, and the spreading of poverty and ill health. Now, today, I think, therefore, there is no doubt. Disease holds back development and weakens societies. Malaria alone taxed Africa and its combined GDP by about $100 billion compared to what it could have been if that disease had been tackled in a different way 30, 40 years ago when effective control measures first became available. The Commission on Macroeconomics and Health that your President mentioned in his introduction was led by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. I wanted to have a commission look at the links between health and the economy. I knew that to be able to speak to the leaders of government and to the finance ministers who keep the buckets of money, they need to see that a public problem has a major economic impact. Otherwise, they don't open their purses, I can tell you. So this was one part of my thinking when I created the Commission on Macroeconomics and Health, that the reality that these links are so strong, they were not known, not to the public, not to the leadership internationally. It had to be focused. So what they showed simply was how investments in health are an important prerequisite for economic development. So that commission concluded that health systems spending $10 or $12 per capita on health, which is what many countries have around in the developing world, are not able to provide even the most basic health services to the people that they serve. And that report called for a six-fold increase in health expenditures in the developing world. But it was based on the analysis of the cost it implies not to make these investments. It focused on a few key diseases and issues which, if tackled, could hugely improve health outcomes for the poorest: AIDS, TB, malaria, children's diseases, and maternal conditions. Now, in these areas, a lot more has happened in the last 5 or 7 years than what was the case before. There has been, it's one of those areas where the Bush administration, in fact, increased the attention to the poor world, was in dealing with AIDS in Africa. It was one area where they really increased their funding and made a difference, together with, of course, a number of other countries, such as my own and others. But this is, of course, not enough, but it shows that arguing the case can make a difference. In fact, competition in a global marketplace will not provide enough incentives for poor countries to move out of poverty. You know, the thinking that we should leave these countries alone and they will grow on their own? No, because the thing is that if you give little help to a country in such desperate situation, they don't even are able to take care of the basic needs of their own people, then there is a problem that needs to be seen through common eyes. You have to take responsibility to bring people that bit up so that they themselves can fight poverty and overcome and get into a positive way of life that can bring prosperity. I believe that when now, well, earlier today I planted the tree that, or together with others, the tree that will carry my name here, and which is a Norwegian maple, a tree that I hadn't even heard of before. But I'm very proud of that. But coming from Norway, the country that has had the great honor to decide each year through an independent committee on the next laureate for the Nobel Peace Prize, I am also happy to conclude that the prize itself, over the years, has been an illustration and a reminder to all of us of the complexity and the broad aspects behind preventing conflict and promoting peace. Often, the Nobel Committee, a fully independent body, has been heavily criticized for taking a bold and comprehensive view on peace. This has not deterred the committee, maybe even convinced these independent personalities that they have been on the right track. They get a little nervous if they are not criticized for the Nobel Peace Prize, frankly. Early in this decade, Jimmy Carter, your former president, was given the Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize. Well deserved, and in this case, not met with much controversy. From his strong commitment in contributing to solving the persistent conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, still there with us, maybe even worse today than ever. But still, you know, his effort was a strong one on this. And to his long-lasting and impressive work to overcome treatable and preventable diseases in poor African countries, such as guinea worm, contributing as it does to human suffering and keeping back communities in lasting poverty, he fully deserved this great honor. But again, the prize was also directly linked to his effort to bring health to poor peoples on the African continent. Wangari Maathai, an African Kenyan activist for protecting the environment, in fact, what she really inspired was tree planting, like we did today. But she was an environmentalist, realizing the very basis for human existence and a sustainable future is the environment in which we live, is another example. Environment and sustainable development is crucial for the livelihood, the water, the soil, and the air we breathe, for prosperity and for survival. It is crucial to prevent conflict and due to intractable competition for land and other resources. It is crucial as a necessary basis for lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights is a universal concept. It's essential to promote democratic, peaceful societies and global conditions, peaceful global conditions. Shirin Ebadi, a woman human rights activist and lawyer from Iran, is a shining example. She also was chosen by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. They made an untraditional choice, And people were saying, is this human rights work, is that working for peace? Yes. To underline from the committee the basic importance of human rights, and especially the rights of women. So I believe I could go further, but, and I will mention to you one more example, which I link to the broad concept of peace. It is the prize given to the economist and professor Muhammad Yunus from Bangladesh, who initiated the idea of giving microcredits to women, focusing on women to help them help their families out of poverty and to build a better life. This is also creating better conditions for peace. Indeed, opportunities, stimulating economic progress, and helping create a foundation for better health and education for the new generations growing up is a contribution to peace. Lastly, let me also mention Al Gore and the IPCC, who shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. Facing the climate change challenge and averting a real crisis for all of us, the evidence and the education, the communication of the risks involved are absolutely crucial. Without it, how can the world manage to raise to the challenge and have sufficient support behind our leaders to decide on the bold and necessary action? As I mentioned, not only will we all be in danger, the poorest countries will be hit the hardest, and their already unstable conditions further deteriorate. This is a great danger for lasting peace, a potential for conflict, and a danger if we want to promote lasting peace. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. The simple fact is that there can be no real growth without healthy populations. No sustainable development without tackling disease and malnutrition. No international security without assisting crisis-ridden countries. No hope for the spread of freedom and democracy unless we treat health as a basic human right. Health must be at the center of all of these agendas. What we are really talking about is the interdependence of people, not just markets and multinationals. Ultimately, improving people's lives remains the bottom line. The way that we, as an international community, and I'm now thinking, what are they doing in London, the G20, representing, hopefully, all of us, not only those 20 countries. If we were not work to address current crises and prevent future ones, working together, that will determine whether we succeed or fail in our shared efforts to promote global development, growth, security, and peace. Thank you very much.
Okay, and Dr. Brundtland has agreed to answer questions for the next 20 minutes. And so we'll have a Q&A. There are microphones set up on this side of the room, and there's a microphone set up on that side of the room. If you would please step to the microphone to ask your question. And we'll begin over here.
Good evening, Prime Minister. My name is Kenton Bird. I teach in our School of Journalism and Mass Media, and I have a two-part question, as journalists are prone to ask. Several times in the past month, our President, Barack Obama, has been accused by his political opponents of trying to move the United States towards Western European-style socialism. As someone who has lived most of your life in Western Europe, do we Americans have anything to fear? And more specifically, what lessons can we learn from Western European nations as we seek to control healthcare costs and expand access to all of our population?
Well, you know, I could give a second speech on this one. However, let me focus on a couple of simple facts. In this, because you also mentioned health costs in addition to other things here now. Now, you spend the highest amount per capita in the world in this country, higher and by a lot, you know, to anyone else. And you still have 45 million, is it, without health insurance, and you have great disparities in health. They are not comparable. You know, when you see the statistics and the evidence about the health statistics in this country, they are not very impressive. There are really great links between poverty and lack of public health and treatment, and the way that people are dealt with in this country. There are great disparities, so you don't get the results that we get in Western Europe. With less money, we have better health indicators than you have in the United States. And those are not just minimal, small differences. They are large. So you really have a problem. So it's hard for me to see how people can imagine warning the American people against the kinds of situations that people have in Europe, where they can feel confident that they will be treated and that they will not, lose their family economy and undermine it if somebody has to go to hospital or need long-term treatment. So, frankly, I think these people are outdated, the ones who made the assertions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brundtland, for coming and for all your work. My name is Sarah Nelson, and I teach French here. And my question is about the same thing. But I wanted to ask you, can you imagine a day where the mentality in this country would change and where we might see a right of good health as a basic right for everyone? Can you see how that might come about, a change in thinking like that, and what effect that might have for the world situation if the United States changed its point of view?
Well, in the case of having a health system that is accessible for all is something self-evident for so many of us that it is hard to really comprehend fully how the United States has been in this kind of backlog for so many decades. It's hard to understand. But I may be too big of an optimist, but I frankly think that if we meet 5 years from now, changes will have happened in the United States that creates a different approach to that whole area. I do believe that the Obama administration and the US Congress together will manage to put a new system in place. It's not very difficult. This is the strange thing. It isn't. You just have to choose, a system that there are several examples of ways to do it. You don't have to make it exactly like the British or the French or any other model, the Canadian, whatever, you know. It can be done. Even here it can be done. I'm sure you will succeed.
Prime Minister, thank you for coming. For the past 2 centuries, human population has been in a logistical growth phase and is accepted as a biological truism that no population can stay in logistical growth forever. Do you feel that we are currently in population overshoot, where we have overshot the carrying capacity of our planet? And if so, what should be done to ease the burdens of human overpopulation?
Well, as you know, we are in a situation that people make choices around the world. They live their lives and they produce kids, and we have a situation where I cannot see any model of direction, of regulation, of global governance or dictatorship that can control the population. I'm not saying that that was your intention, but I sometimes have to say this because I meet people who have some concept that yes, since the balance between the earth as we see it and the number of people has been going, you know, in the direction of more and more people over the last century and more, and the capacity of the earth to carry or total population is diminishing, is becoming a challenge. How do we deal with it? So we have to deal with it. But we need to be changing the way we use natural resources. That is a more important aspect, I think, than focusing on how can we handle reducing the number of people or lowering because it takes longer time. First of all, I don't believe any dictator wherever can do it, except by methods which are absolutely unacceptable to the whole audience. So then we know that if people get education, if mothers know that their children will grow up healthy, they don't have more than 2 or 3 children. We know what happened in our own countries. It happened through the method of health and education and investing in people so that they could make their choices in life, and they then make good choices. But so many parts of the world are still not there. We need to overcome poverty. We need to empower women. We need to let society see that their families can live and survive, and that they will live to see their children grow up. Before, I think, this is what also is the philosophy of, you can say, our international institutions, the policy that has been agreed from Cairo onwards. And I don't think there is any opportunity to basically change that philosophy, except stepping up and doing more of what is necessary to reach the Millennium Development Goals, which will help us avoid too much increase in the population.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for visiting us here at the University of Idaho. My name is Rula Awad Rafferty. I'm a faculty at the university. And throughout your talk, one place was foremost in front of my eyes, in my mind, and that's Gaza. When you mentioned how the world acted as one in the face of SARS and how that collaboration stopped the spread of disease, now we have this humanitarian crisis. What we are still debating whether there's really a humanitarian crisis or not. But how can we
as a world, stop blame game and stop shifting responsibilities and act together, because there are people suffering, of course.
You know, there are many conflicts, not only the one that we all know about in Gaza, where there is war, conflict, human suffering, but we all followed on our TV screens the tragedy evolving as that situation came in January, February, which is why we have it in our eyes, you know. But there are situations where, even in a collaborating world, the solution is not obviously, you know, to be made immediately. In this case, the world, I think, more or less, you know, the world is working through many actors and through many countries to try to support the peace process between the Israeli and the Palestinians. And they are struggling, but that conflict is obviously so difficult. You know, it has been around for more than 40 years, and it's had phases of seemingly improvements and then backlashes. But it illustrates that it's not always so that as long as we collaborate across countries and continents and try to look, you know, in a reasonable way on the source of conflict, it's not always, even then, possible to point out the solution and move together to help it happen. It's one of those tragic spots, and there are others that we could mention. But there is no way to be helping solving and finding a way forward in the Middle East without broad global collaboration and without the Muslim, the Arab world working with other countries across the world to find a respectable and lasting solution.
Thank you again for coming this evening. I was very moved by the process of solving the SARS epidemic, but it's actually very interesting to me because how do you globalize the efforts in the same ways in order to solve the AIDS epidemic that has been plaguing our nations for 40 years? It just seems like it's such a large international problem, and so is SARS, so how can they be equalized?
Well, I try to explain, you know, how the history of AIDS is very different in its characteristics from what happened with SARS. With SARS, something dangerous happened, and the WHO could point, and of course the press helped, you know, spread the news about people dying from this disease that you couldn't treat. And countries became aware and governments became scared. They were warned by the WHO, and within weeks, a lot of things happened based on a number of governments following the advice of WHO. In the case of HIV, it happened over years, gradually. Few people knew. First, we didn't know what the source was. Then, as gradually science came up with the knowledge of the virus, one understood the character of that disease, but it still was a disease spreading in the homosexual community and among drug users. It was not easy to scare all governments around the world about that. So the people who were in WHO before me, they warned, sent out recommendations, you know, but it never came as the #1 agenda on the politicians' attention. So that is the big difference in different types of situations. But as the drama unfolds over decades, with millions and millions increasing in numbers of people affected and dying from it, then gradually it was possible to mobilize more attention, more resources. But you couldn't get that kind of direct, action, which you can in a typical crisis situation where everyone is alerted at the same time and scared for their own population. Yeah.
Good evening to the room and also to Dr. Brundtland. My question kind of builds off of Amber's. My name is Kimberly Castellan and I'm a senior graduating this May. And I know that there are several NGOs that exist that kind of hotspot areas for conflict. And I was wondering if there was a system that did the same for areas where epidemics might spread too quickly, and how to force governments to see that preemptive cost of like providing correct nutrition and just really basic health, how that could be less costly than fighting an epidemic like the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah, the WHO has a network of collaborating centers. It also has an internet-based reporting system which picks up early atypical health patterns, disease patterns, and shares them across the world with NGOs and with Doctors Without Borders, and everyone that is active in the field can have a source of knowledge so that they can be the early warning system. This is one contribution that WHO makes by having that kind of alert system for early warning. But it's a general. You have a more general question that covers the fact that preventive action and the building of healthy societies is a better way than to deal with problems as they have already arisen. And but how we can get to a situation where where you have more of this collaborative spirit, more willingness to share the cost also of doing the preventive efforts, is a challenge, whether we speak about developing aid efforts or we speak about the way to deal with the climate crisis. Because unless we find a solution by the end of the year that can combine the United States and have it into the fold with the other industrialized countries, but also including the big economies which have emerged since the Kyoto Protocol, like China and Brazil and India and so on, into a global pattern of collaboration to fight climate change, we will all be in a very bad situation. So again, that's a challenge again where we need to be willing to share the cost also of helping the poorer countries out of the consequences of the development patterns that we ourselves have created. Take one more. Yeah.
This will be the last question.
Thank you, Dr. Brundtland. I wonder if you might address the priorities, global priorities that we might have in providing health care to the bottom billion, those people who are living on $1 or less per day.
That's a difficult question. If the priorities about what needs to be done are the kinds of things that I mentioned. It is dealing with the major public health threats, the big diseases that really have a high number of cases and which affect people across the world, like AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. They are some of the biggest killers. But on the other hand, it's the basic health system that deals with respiratory infections, that deals with diarrhea and gives the right advice. It is mothers and children, and the very, to now, the one, because mothers and children are so crucial in preventing illness and having healthy children grow up, that they certainly in the first week and month of their life, unless there is a system taking care of mothers and children in that critical period, you really have a big problem. The thing is, the Millennium Development Goals, many of them are linked to health directly or indirectly. The one that is hardest to deal with, because of the total implication of having accessible health personnel to deal with every woman in every country when they need it, before and after birth. This has been a big challenge, and we have not moved forward on that one as much as we should have hoped. So we are still having very large numbers of maternal deaths. A woman in a poor African country having a risk of 4,000 times the risk that I had when I gave birth in my country, or you have when you give birth in this country. So that's where the drama of difference is the greatest. But it also, to be able to deal with every mother and every birth in some way when there is a risk, you really have to have a functioning health system. And so many countries just don't. And so it's a high priority, but it's not going to be solved in a year or two. This is the tragedy. Well, I have mentioned the most important ones, I think, now to deal with. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Brundtland, for those insightful comments and from the questions from the audience. And now I'd like to invite President Daley Larson. Sorry.
Dr. Brundtland, thank you so very much for honoring us with your presence and for informing us with your messages and for inspiring us with your deep experience and your challenging visions. Now, one of the things I'm going to do tomorrow is reassign all of my vice presidents and deans to different colleges and jobs. Check your email this evening, ladies and gentlemen. But there are very smart people that I have the great pleasure of working with in this institution. We're known for smart people. And the people who've been escorting you and thinking about you coming have been getting to know you, and they've been thinking about how could they in any way honor you, provide you with some sentimental remembrance of our institution to remind you that you need to come back. And so they were thinking of themes that you talked about tonight, and themes that are really reminiscent of your work. Transcendence is a big one. Interdependence is a big one. And so they were thinking, well, music transcends culture, creates interdependence, and certainly fosters creativity. And we all know that about music. We have this music thing here at the University of Idaho that we think you maybe know about. The Lionel Hampton International Jazz Festival. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, that's good. Good. And these geniuses that I work with, they said, let's give her some remembrance in our music. Did you know that this Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival received the National Medal of Arts, the first time a public university has been bestowed with that honor?
I heard it today, but not before.
Just a short time ago, actually. That's a very special piece of recognition. And it is also now critically acclaimed as probably the world's most influential educational jazz phenomenon. That's very impressive. So what my colleagues thought would be appropriate would be some original music from our artistic director, John Clayton, that's there, and then also a commemorative medal from the National Medal of Arts celebration in 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, let's send off Dr. Brundtland back to Norway, though she leaves herself here in her Norway maple. And let's wish for her that her influence and her tree continue to grow. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Prime Minister Brundtland.